Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar. The topic of the day is bare metal versus cloud, how infrastructure is a board level decision now. My name is David Davis and I'll be your moderator for today's event. Before we jump into it, just a few things that you should know about the webinar. First off, if you have any questions on the event today, we encourage your questions. That's why we're here, to get your questions answered. So just drop those questions there in the Q&A box on the bottom of the console. We're excited to welcome our friends from Hivelocity. They've provided some great resources for you there in the console as well. So we encourage you to check those out. We also want to tell you that this webinar is being recorded. That's one of the common questions we get. So keep an eye out for the link for the replay in your email box that you registered for this event with. And with that, I'm excited to kick off today's webinar. We're honored to have most of the C-suite at Hivelocity on the webinar today. I'm excited to welcome Mr. Ned Pope. He's the Chief Product Officer at Hivelocity. We've got Matt Schatz, Chief Revenue Officer, Ross Woodham, Chief Legal Officer, and Ronnie Frames, Chief Operating Officer. So many of the executives are here to answer your questions, and we're going to have a great discussion today. So with that, let's go ahead and kick it off and get started. And I'll do that by posing the first question of the day, and that's about the big picture. So my question here is, the cloud era was supposed to simplify everything. And for many of us, maybe that didn't quite happen. Ronnie, I want to get your take on that. What do you think has happened?
So nothing's really happened. Businesses are just beginning to question value, right? So the cloud has become a business decision, not just a technology one. Boards are scrutinizing infrastructure spend. Cloud decisions are being evaluated just like any other capital metal or purchase or operating expense. So the conversations have shifted away from can we move to the cloud to are we getting the expected business value out of the cloud? The original assumption behind cloud adoptions just doesn't hold true for every workload. So workloads that have predictable steady state often don't benefit from the elasticity or the pricing models of cloud. So CFOs are examining this, the long-term operating costs, and the questions changing. The questions becoming, isn't whether cloud is good, it's whether every workload belongs there. And from the Hivelocity perspective, we've been watching this for over 2 decades. Bare metal has always been right here. It's not gone away. And it's always been the right answer for certain workloads. High performance workloads, predictable utilization, AI inferencing. This isn't a reversal from the cloud. It's all about, evaluating workloads and putting those workloads in the right place.
That's smart. I like that. And Ned, what's your take on this?
I just believe that infrastructure is no longer a one-size-fits-all conversation. And so folks that are thinking about utilizing the cloud, they end up paying for a level of infrastructure that they'll never need or never utilize. And so what we try to do at Hivelocity is really approach it from a solutioning standpoint. What sort of industry are our clients in? What sort of applications and data sets are they utilizing? What are the outcomes that they're trying to provide for their end-use customers? Or is this internal applications, things of that nature? Asking those questions help us to cater a solution that fits for them without them having to pay for things that they're never going to need and they're never going to utilize.
Yeah, I think that's smart. It sounds like it's not a one-size-fits-all. You're trying to find the right solution for the right company and the right product and the right app. So very intelligent. And Ned, I want to ask you another question while we're chatting here. When you're in front of customers out there and the cloud economics conversation comes up, as I'm sure it does, what does that actually look like? What are organizations really realizing when it comes to cloud economics?
Well, that's a good question, because Ronnie, in his previous comment, he mentioned value. It's all about value, but value is not a blanket statement. What's valuable to one firm might be different to another. It's really about prioritization on outcomes. And so that's how we look at it. There are many firms that see the value in cloud because they need that elasticity and they need that extremely high level of capability in terms of complexity and compute power and all of those things. But some firms are like, yeah, we don't want to be on a shared environment because that makes the compliance and regulatory requirements that we're subject to in our industry much more challenging because they have to certify certain things that are very difficult to do in a shared environment. They also have less control of those environments and less flexibility. And then you'll hear predictability come up a lot. I know plenty of people that have seen that billing email over the years where it's that surprise number of like you almost become a victim of your own success in some circumstances without that predictability. Companies are going in, running applications and data sets and thinking about, should we hold back on our marketing? Because if we get too many users or we get too many transactions on this new application that we're promoting, is it going to blow our internal cost model out of the water because we get some bill that we weren't expecting? So those are the types of conversations that we'd like to have. Make it more about solutioning than just hardware configuration choices.
That's smart. I mean, businesses can't run without predictability. Matt, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Ned. Yeah, I think so many people, when they move to the cloud, put everything into the cloud. And there's so many workloads, as Ned was talking about, that don't require that level of elasticity that the cloud is exceptional at providing. But so you put these workloads into the cloud that don't require the elasticity, but you're paying the cloud premium in a framework that is highly unpredictable. That's really frustrating. And so when we can have a conversation and provide like a true financial framework that is predictable, that gets the conversation going very naturally of what are those workloads that require a cloud environment, but what are the ones that might not have that elasticity that they can move to a bare metal piece. And now with the rising conversation around compliance and the increased focus on compliance, and that is around the globe, and making sure that you can pass audits and so forth, it makes a lot more sense to start looking at particular workloads and putting them on bare metal from a compliance perspective and from a predictability perspective, and also identifying what are those workloads that do require the elasticity that work perfectly in the cloud and finding that balance. It's always about, we're constantly overcorrecting. At one point it was, everything goes on bare metal and then everything needs to go to cloud. And what the future that I see is really one of a hybrid motion. And this is not about, that there is no purpose for the cloud. There's a great purpose for the cloud, but there's also a great purpose for bare metal. And I think that's where the real realization is happening, around IT leaders and senior leaders, both in the finance side, in the compliance side, on IT side, is being able to go and find that balance.
Great advice. You got to find a balance. Ronnie, what's your take from an operations perspective?
Yeah, so from where I sit on the operations side, this is where the economics become real and aren't just theoretical, right, on a piece of paper. Like every day we see how we have to monitor how workloads perform, how they're supported, what the real costs are to deliver those workloads. And this gap just keeps getting wider and wider. So it's just something that we have to continue to measure, and we constantly do measure on the ops side.
Very smart. Very smart. All right, let's move on to our next question. This one's for you, Matt. I know you're in front of customers every day. When it comes to cloud repatriation, what does that conversation look like or sound like right now?
Yeah, I was, dude, it was a great question because I was really struck recently at a trade show that I was at, and there was, several thousand IT leaders. And the conversation was no longer around we're thinking about it. It was all full focused on we're planning for this. And I think that has a real fundamental shift that I've seen in the last couple of years from thinking to actively planning. The issue, is typically around the bills that they have gotten, the rising costs, the lack of the predictability, everything that we have talked about before. And now it's around how do I do it? Who can help me go and move? Who can help me go and determine the workloads? But it's no longer a concept. It's actually companies are putting this in action to go and better serve throughout every aspect of their business, and being good financial stewards of their business. What needs elasticity, what doesn't. But as I say, it was really striking for the first time. It wasn't like, we're kind of thinking about it. It's like, no, we're actively planning. How can you help us there?
Wow, I mean, and that's a big deal, especially for these big hyperscalers. I'm sure it comes to the level of the board. What are we going to do? Where are we going to run our applications? Ronnie, what are you seeing and hearing out there?
I think Matt's spot on there from what he's hearing. Like the escape plan, quote unquote, is necessary, right? You need to start doing this stuff. You need to start preparing, and you need to start to take it and look at this from a more holistic business perspective. simply because you don't want to wait until your hand is forced with a renewal or with a price increase. All those things happen, and now you're paying even more, and the gap again gets even wider operationally from a cost and from operation cost perspective, because you're basically spending more for workloads that are consistent and don't really belong there. So I think the planning aspect is huge, and we're hearing it directly from the customer. So.
Excellent. And Ross, what's the legal angle to this?
Yeah, it's a really good question because one of the trends that we've seen is as is often the case, technology and regulation are rarely in sync, and regulation is comes behind the technology. So the technology gets launched, and we saw this with cloud back in the early sort of 2010 and onwards, and it became a huge momentum in the industry. And then we started to see the regulations that started to curtail what people could do in the cloud and how they manage their data. And so we were also seeing this legal dimension and almost geopolitical dimension where you've got customers who have expectations around where their data sits. And businesses need to have a very clear understanding and clear answer to that question and be able to meet contractual obligations around where data sits. And so when you're talking about the cloud and that's potentially less clear, the alternative being bare metal is that you have much more certainty around where your data is sitting and where your data is being processed. And so I think that has become much more of a theme in the conversations that we're having with customers.
I like that. And let's move on and talk a little bit more about this hyperscaler escape plan. I'm curious, what does that actually look like in practice? I mean, it shouldn't be like an escape room where they have to try to figure out how to get out. It should be more like a fighter jet where they pull the escape handle there and they eject. So what are the components of this, Ronnie? How does it look?
Well, it starts with business objective, right? Not the technology. So I know the term hyperscale escape kind of sounds dramatic, but in practice, it's really about making deliberate infrastructure decisions at the end of the day. We don't start by asking, how do we leave the cloud? We start to ask, what are the business outcomes we're trying to achieve? Whether that's lowering cost, improving performance, meeting compliance requirements, whatever it might be. And then we get a clear understanding of the workload portfolio, which applications genuinely benefit from the cloud elasticity. You don't just move everything, you move the right things. And so most organizations find once they start to understand their applications, 80% of their spend is spent on workloads that are better served on bare metal or somewhere else. So the plan really has three basic components. It's a financial case, it's a target architecture, and it's a phased execution plan. And this kind of gives the business confidence that decisions and investment decisions that are being made are measurable and have outcomes associated to them. Like, keep it small, and then you start to move the things that matter and the things that make the most sense.
Very nice. And then what about the tools for this actual hyperscaler escape plan? What does that look like?
Well, David, it's all about putting yourselves in the shoes of the users. I mean, we really look at the tooling, look at the steps in the process, look at the type of decisions that our clients are going to be making and that are facing them on a day-to-day basis relating to infrastructure from the perspective of that user. What are they actually clicking on? What are they actually seeing? What are the steps that they have to take to execute on this? Because ultimately, this is not what they spend their day-to-day responsibilities and activities on. This is a support mechanism. They have jobs relating to their responsibilities in their field, and that's going to be their priority and their focus. So we try to make it as streamlined and as easy as possible by putting ourselves in their shoes. So we found the best approach is a combination of a service element, hands-on service from our teams, regardless of where their infrastructure is hosted across our fleet. But then also a very intuitive self-service portal. So think about it in the context of when someone onboards, they get a high touch point and high activity and high service support from us. But then we also go about the process of teaching them how to use our tools, and we found that they pick it up pretty easily because they're built to be intuitive. And another element of that too is all of the tooling that we use for deployment, for upgrades, for changes, for adjustments. It's the same stuff that we use internally. So we are able to use it and adjust it in a way to where we know it makes it simpler, we know it makes it more intuitive and makes it faster for our teams. So by the time we roll these things out in the client portal to our customers, they've already been utilized a bunch of times. So even something that looks to the external marketplace or to our existing client base, even something that looks brand new, it's a piece of functionality that we've already been using effectively for quite a while before we turn it on for our users. So it's been a pretty good approach for us. It's working so far.
I love that you have intuitive tools to do this and you use your own tools. Ronnie, what about the teams that actually do this? What can you tell us about them?
Obviously the plan is only as good as the execution, right? So the architecture matter, migration windows, rollback capability, all these things need to be incorporated. That's where the operations side of the business is going to live, and what we've been working on at Hivelocity. So we kind of design everything from a migration perspective, assuming everything is going to need to be adjusted, and we're going to have to modify. So from that perspective, it's just preparing your teams to be fluid and to kind of roll with the punches as these unknowns come up.
That's awesome. It's great you guys have tools, you have a plan, you use these tools yourself. And let's move on now and let's talk about AI. I'm sure you guys have heard of AI before. That's all we talk about these days, right? So every infrastructure provider out there is talking about AI right now. And I'm sure there's a lot of folks out there in the audience raising their hand. But what about AI? So how does Hivelocity think about AI differently? Ronnie?
Well, the market hype is real. Like, obviously you see it every day in the stock market, you see it in the supply chain. So, it's in our face constantly. But what we see is enormous interest, but uncertainty on how to execute and actually show value for the current cost. That's the stuff that we're really struggling. So we've taken a very deliberate approach to this, and Ned can speak more to this, but we're focusing on customer outcomes, not the AI headline. Like our strategy is pretty simple. We're looking to build what we need to build or what customers need, prove that it works for them, and then scale that demand, not on hype, but on actual demand from the customer.
Smart. That's a good approach. So let's talk legal and compliance. Ross, why is that conversation so urgent right now?
Yeah, so I think that this is really just not just a technology decision. The regulatory landscape, data residency requirements and audit obligations, that's becoming an increasing burden for customers, and in particular certain verticals like healthcare and fintech. These are requirements that are not going away. They're becoming increasingly important, increasingly hard to meet, and the impact on the mid-market is they're needing to rethink how they're approaching some of this stuff. And so when you think about data sovereignty, it used to be a question of a sort of simple regulatory mandate. Where does the data sit and which market do you operate within? But once you start talking about multi-jurisdictional use of data, and that might be state or national level, but when you're talking about this more complex multiple market approach, then sovereignty becomes this really complex regulatory issue where you're thinking about national laws and state laws and who has authority over certain data, and which citizens' data you're processing within certain locations. And so you have to start solving some pretty complex equations in terms of where your data resides and where it's being processed. And of course, once you start to layer on AI on top of this becomes even more complicated because you're talking about the training models, so your SLMs and your LLMs and your inferencing happening. What data are you using for training? What data are you using for inferencing? And what happens to the data once the inferencing has occurred, and who's accessing it? It becomes a very complex landscape. And so using dedicated infrastructure that you're able to kind of pinpoint on a map and say that's where my server resides starts to chip away at the complexity and is something that I think is a really useful tool. And I'm not saying that all of this should be happening on dedicated infrastructure, but I think dedicated infrastructure and bare metal really does become part of a hybrid solution to that complexity.
That's smart. Those are a lot of important points that I'm sure a lot of technology people don't think about as much. It's not just a technology decision, and there's a lot of legal and compliance things to be considered. Matt, what are you hearing from customers?
Yeah, it's interesting what Ross was talking about because nowadays, compliance actually comes up in one of the beginning conversations. Like it used to be just at the very end now, but as Ross was describing the complexity of that, now it's kind of front and center. And I think the other thing is when CTOs are having to go with legal and partner with legal and say, hey, we got a compliance gap. The conversation very quickly turns to infrastructure and how do we can become compliant. And I think also David, I've been in hosting since 2000. And as certain compliant like regulations came up with SOC 2 and so forth and ISOs and so forth, that used to be kind of more of a tick the box. Like, do you have it or do you not? And can I get a document? Can I get a piece of paper that shows that you got this level of compliancy? But nowadays, that doesn't, as we would say in Texas, that doesn't cut the mustard anymore. What you got to go and do now is find a true partner who's going to get into the weeds with you and go and figure out rather than just turning over a document. And that's a real shift and change that I've seen in the market.
Excellent. All right. Well, let's keep this conversation going. Next question is to you, Ned. I'm sure managed services, they keep coming up as this kind of missing layer in this whole equation. What does that actually mean for bare metal providers and why does it matter so much?
Well, you've got some optionality as to who you want to be when you go into the marketplace as a bare metal provider or as an infrastructure shop that specializes in bare metal. And there are some that take the position that they just want to be a commodity shop and they just want to have availability of various different models with the specifications that folks are looking for. That's not the approach that we're taking to the marketplace, and that's not how we've structured our firm. We look at bare metal, without a solution mindset as just a self-serve marketplace. And so we do have a lot of self-serve marketplace capabilities, but we always think about it from the position of a solution. What are our clients trying to do? What are they trying to accomplish? What do they really need? What's the price point that's going to get them some scalability and some room to grow without unnecessarily taxing their budget and overpaying for that choice? And so it's similar to what we talked about with the repatriation approach. It's a mix of internal service combined with what we're rolling out now and what a lot of the market is going to see from us going forward, which is a greatly expanded partnership model. So between the internal talent that we have and the services that we provide and what those folks specialize in, combined with our expanded partnership model and all of the partnerships that we're going to be announcing and moving into, we can cover a lot of the needs across various different industries. We have multiple industry verticals that we built solutions for and catered to over time, and we're going to be expanding that reach as well. So, I would say we're going to have a very, very robust offering relating to managed service very, very soon, and you're already seeing the result of that.
That's exciting. Ronnie, tell us more about managed service.
Yes. So from the operating perspective, this is where kind of operations kind of meets the strategy, right? So you deploy to the correct workload to the right architecture, and it's important to have the foundation built underneath of all of that. So the approach, again, back to the pragmatic and deliberate approach that we're taking, we're looking to start small here, get it right, and then scale. So we end up looking at services that naturally play very, very well with our core services, and that's where we play. That's kind of where if it doesn't fit our core, it's not that we can't provide a solution. To Ned's point, we'll look at partners and we'll look to augment with partnerships with different MSPs and things of that nature. But from our perspective, we're taking the approach that if we either build it right or we don't build it at all. So we want to make sure that everything we do is delivered at a high standard. and that we can stand behind it every time.
Excellent. Excellent. Thanks, Ronnie. All right. So let's get real for a minute here. What is the hardest objection you hear when you're talking to organizations out there and they're considering moving away from cloud? And then how do you respond to that? Matt, I'll let you take it first.
Yeah, the most common thing you would probably think about is that the top objection is going to be cost. But typically, repatriating bare metal is a lower cost. So what's the real objection? The real objection is fear. Fear of disruption. Our website can't go down. This application can't go down, and so forth. And it's that fear of disruption that drives people to stay in the cloud, even though now they're going to go and continue to go and pay these scaling costs and everything that we have talked about. And, not to be dismissive of that fear of disruption, because it is real. There is risk, but that risk is absolutely manageable. And I think that this is, this is advice to all of our competitors in the bear market space. Your prospects, they don't need a sales pitch. What they need is a plan. Put together a plan, a thoughtful plan, a timely plan that is able to go and address those concerns. And then you can go and build that trust to be able to go and help them do it. But it's not a sales pitch. It's an actual detailed plan. And that's what, prospects, that's what customers deserve to be able to go and have. And look, David, the other thing that's, quite interesting is that, a lot of people also, there's some internal politics that are going on. Hey, 7, 8 years ago, we were on bare metal and I went to the CTO, or the CTO went to the CEO and said, we got to move everything to the cloud right away. And now all of a sudden, 6, 7 years later, now we got to get out of the cloud. And so, nobody likes to fail, and that can feel like failure. But, the reality is at the moment, at time, of course you moved everything to the cloud. Everybody was doing that. But things evolve and things change. And I think that now, as people are figuring out this hybrid approach, that's not failure. That's just maturity in the market. That is just being able to go and see where the market dynamics are, and being able to go and do the kind of the best case for your client in terms of which workloads are. And so it's not failure. It's just maturity as that market has evolved. And so I think it's the internal politics as well as fear of disruption. Those are the two biggest, objection. One stated and one typically not stated, about that fear of, hey, we made the wrong decision. But you got to be able to go and tease that out, because that is a very real human emotion.
I like that. Having a plan is going to solve those objections and prepare people to make this move. Ned, what are you hearing? What objections are you hearing out there, and how do you handle those?
I think it's exactly aligned with what Matt just said. Just a concern of having migrated everything over to the cloud, and what sort of effort is related to that, and then what sort of results are we going to get after we made this choice, less than a decade ago. But the market shifts, and I think Ross alluded to it a little bit when he was talking about regulation, on how regulation sort of follows the technology. Sometimes the market follows the technology capabilities too. So folks were so adamant to rush to the cloud because of the expansiveness of it. And then now they're starting to realize, maybe we didn't need to put everything over there. Maybe there were some things that were a better fit for an isolated, more stable, more compliance ready environment with very, very specific use cases. So data models specifically for BI dashboards and things of that nature. You could run that very effectively on bare metal at a fraction of the cost as you would from a cloud, and actually get lower latency and, less problems with delays, and where you're seeing outdated numbers and data and those things. I would say overall, the way that we approach it in terms of the concerns is that we expect the best, because we've tested it time and time and time again, and we use these real world use cases in our tests, so we know that it will work when we deploy it on behalf of a client. But then we prepare for the worst, and we always make sure that we have the proper redundancy, the rollback capabilities, all of the monitoring. And I'm not just talking about BAU server performance monitoring. I'm talking about monitoring through your migration window, monitoring during a natural disaster. I'm sitting here in Tampa, Florida, and we expect wonderful, hot, humid, lots of outdoor activities during the summer. But in 2024, when we got smacked with 2 hurricanes that hit my neighborhood, that was not exactly what we expected. But we had a plan, because we evacuated for hurricanes once every year, once every 2 years. So we know exactly the city we're going to go to, and the hotels we're going to look at, and the ones that can accommodate our family and pets and all that kind of thing. It's the same type of approach. We expect optimal performance. We expect optimal conditions, and our clients expect that. But we want them to know that we're prepared for everything that could come our way, because adversity is pretty rampant in life in general. So make sure that we're ready for it.
Absolutely. You always have to have a plan. Ross, what about compliance and legal objections related to this?
Yeah, I think that probably the most common objection is when customers are looking at AWS or Azure, they'll see every single certification badge out there listed. And the question is, well, if we go to another provider or we go to a bare metal provider, will we have the same certifications? And more often than not, the answer will be no, it won't have every single certification. But the real difference is that whereas AWS do that in a way, or Azure do that in a way so that they don't need to engage with you as a customer, because they're effectively saying, hey, we've ticked the box. We don't need to have that conversation. What we actually are saying is, actually, you really need to have that conversation with us. This is a shared responsibility model, and we're going to spend the time investing in working out where that shared responsibility lies, what our controls are going to be, what your controls are going to be, and make sure that that actually works for both parties. And that's a unique really to the mid-market, where we're able to do that with our customers. And so I think it's really important that we position this as this is not a compromise. This is actually a control surface itself. This is a control step for the organization, and a positive in that regard.
Yeah, I really like how we're looking at this, repatriation for specific applications and workloads, not as a failure, but as a really a right sizing for,
That's right. And I think AI as well really does change the realities that we've been working with. 5 years ago, these issues around AI weren't there. Now they really do create some questions that need some answers. So.
Excellent. All right. So, Ronnie, let's say that there's a CTO or a CFO out there in the audience, and I'm confident that there is. They're out there right now, and they're asking this question. They're seriously considering moving their workloads off the cloud. And what's the question that you would want them to walk away asking themselves?
Yes. So from a singular question perspective, it'd be, do you understand your workload stability and predictability? Like, do you know what you're leveraging? And from there, it generates more questions beyond that, right? So do you know what you're paying for the flexibility, that you don't use for those workloads? Where are you spending extra money? One example kind of comes to me around that's pretty interesting to me is we when folks have moved to the cloud and there's this whole undercurrent that's started to form around DevOps. And now you spend a lot of time, your developers or resource, or you're hiring a DevOps person that's basically just managing the infrastructure of the cloud. And I'm talking the virtual components, not the physical. So you're wasting a lot of energy and effort around those things. So understanding the true cost of what you're paying for workloads that could easily live in a more consistent on a platform that's consistent, that has all the properties of a fixed cost structure, all of these types of things that really benefit the business. So I would that would be the one question that I would ask, is just run the numbers and look at understand your workload and run the numbers against it.
Smart, very smart. I like it. All right, that brings us to the last question here, and that is for Ned. If you look out 18 to 24 months, what does the infrastructure landscape look like for organizations in the room, and what should they be preparing for right now?
I would say they should be preparing for optimization and the benefits of optimization. So think about the type of laptop you could have purchased and how much it would have cost with like 10 gigs in the hard drive. That probably would have been top of the marketplace or something 20, 25 years ago. Now you're looking at terabyte capacity in a laptop that's less expensive than those ones 20 years ago. So the one thing that we know about technology is that it is improving at a rapid state, and it is in a constant state of improvement. What you're looking at with the hyperscale providers is they've sunk a lot of investment into top of the line hardware to be able to meet the highest scale in the marketplace. And so what are really the needs of your business? If an AI tool that you could use right now pointed at your selective language model, your SLM data set, if the needs that you have right now could only be met by a hyperscale provider, but 3 to 4 months, you might be able to run on a mid-level GPU-based server that's costing you less than $1,000 or $2,000 a month. You should be preparing for that. You should be looking at the marketplace. And that is something that we're in testing rounds on right now and that we're already prepared for and already have the capabilities to handle. So that's one piece of advice I would give to folks is, don't lock yourself in on long-term 3 and 5 year contracts with a hyperscaler when you know that the optimization of all of this tooling and what you can do with it is coming.
Very wise. Very wise. Thank you, Ned. All right. So thank you so much to all our expert presenters today. That ends our regular webinar, discussion here. It's been fantastic. I've learned so much. I know the audience has as well. Let's now move on to our Q&A session. If you have questions out there in the audience for any of our speakers, please type them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the page right now, because we're going to kick it off. And we've already got some great questions coming in during our panel discussion. First question, this one's for, let's say, Ronnie. We'll start off with Ronnie on this. They're asking, we have been on cloud for years, and the idea of moving anything back feels like a nightmare internally. Where do you even start?
I think the biggest mistake most companies make is they assume they have to move everything. The answer there is they don't, right? Start with the assessment, look at the environment, identify which workloads are stable and predictable, where you can kind of get some economic savings for putting things on a platform, again, that has more predictable cost structures. And then once you kind of understand that, then you can start to formulate a migration plan that's staged and phased. The most successful kind of repatriation efforts start with one workload, prove the process, and then start to expand it from there. So it's the same approach we're taking from the product development side that you heard Ned speak about. We want to make sure we're building it right, or we don't build it. And then once we build it right, then we can start to replicate that model in other places. So I think that's the biggest thing. Matt, I don't know if you have some more that you want to add here or not, but
yeah, we see some themes coming out of this conversation. And one is let's start with a plan. Let's understand what those right workloads are and so forth. And to Ronnie's point, when it comes to repatriation, it's not about moving everything. Once again, we're not going to go and overcorrect each time. Let's find one workload that makes a lot of sense to be able to go and do for bare metal. Let's put together a right plan. Let's execute on that plan. And then from there we go. And we go one step at a time. And it's not an all or nothing conversation, as most things in life rarely are. And so it's one workload at a time and being able to go and figure out a plan. You nail that, then it becomes a whole lot easier. But I think that sometimes people come in and it's like, oh, repatriation, let's start moving everything. And I'm the first one to go and say, this is a sales guy saying, no, hold on. We don't want everything right now. One at a time. Let's go one at a time and make sure we do this right.
Yeah, that's great advice. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing. So you talked about the tools a little bit. This question for you, Ned, they're asking about tools. They say, our team lives in AWS tooling. How painful is it to really make the switch operationally?
Interesting, the way that question was framed, because many of the hyperscale tools are pretty painful to navigate. Look, when you are trying to, like the hyperscalers are, when you're trying to provide solutions for every possible customer, regardless of size and scale, you're going to end up with tooling that accounts for every possible nuance. And the complexity that adds for the majority of firms that have a very clear direction around their application, their data sets, the way that they want to utilize APIs, things of that nature. It's just a lot of bloat inside of those tools. And so what we bring to the table is a simplified experience and it dramatically speeds up and adds a lot of clarity and transparency as to what are the steps inside of the portal to execute on a migration, and then to be able to monitor and check all of the infrastructure once it's set up to make sure that it was done effectively before you archive things, or before you scale down that hyperscale membership and things of that nature. I've also heard it from a lot of I would say mid-market firm leaders and CTOs and things of that nature. It's like, mid-market companies aren't small companies by any evaluation, but when compared to the largest corporations in the world, which is what the hyperscaler firms are built to accommodate, they might seem small. And I've heard it from all of them, like, I can't ever seem to get somebody on a call. I can't find someone that will actually talk to me. I might get an email response. I might get a chatbot that's relatively accurate that I'm going back and forth with, but can I actually talk to somebody that can just give me 30 minutes of their time? And it's like, you have to be at a certain size, scale, and expense point with the hyperscalers for them to actually assign someone to help you manage your account. Whereas someone from Matt's team, or someone from Ronnie's team or mine, could jump on a call with you and walk you through your migration as you're doing it, and then also engage in that process of, like, let us show you how to use the streamlined self-service elements of the MyV client portal while you're in here. And then if you have any questions going forward, we can focus those questions on the specific issues you're running into, not on the broad-based, execution of the migration or the management of the infrastructure itself.
David, I would add that, I would ask the question, for certain workloads, why are you using the tooling at all? Like, these things are stable and you're wasting a lot of cycles operationally that you just don't need to for certain workloads that are constant. And so that's where I think a lot of these folks are starting to reevaluate, and why this conversation has moved up stack to the business from a business value perspective.
Excellent. Thank you, Ronnie. Thank you, Ned. Next question here. I think this one's for you, Matt. They're saying, what do you say to a CTO who wants to move, but their CFO just signed a 3-year cloud deal 6 months ago?
What was the case? It was funny, David, is that I literally had a conversation around this. It wasn't a 3-year contract. It was a 2-year contract, but I just had this conversation just the other day with one of our Australian customers. And like, for me, it's like, well, we're already behind. We better start planning right now. And I think that, what ends up happening is, if you delay this conversation, and you're only thinking about, it's maybe 6 months before your renewal date, you're already so far behind the 8 ball at that point that now you're almost going to be forced to stay in hyperscalers. And so the more time for planning, the more time that you can go and ensure a successful execution. And just, Ronnie's been talking about, let's look at the workloads. Let's figure out how to go and optimize the workloads now. And there's typically some dramatic cost savings right now that you can go and do. And then you can go and, thematically look through all your workflows, make sure that you understand which ones to be able to go and work, make sure that you understand that you can limit your exposure there, because nobody wants that disruption and so forth. But it's all about putting together the plan. Start planning now. If you wait until, traditionally, 6 months before the renewal date, you're putting yourself in a really poor position, because now the level of disruption that you are theoretically bringing into the business dramatically goes up, versus, a year or 2 years out, and you're actually putting that, plan together. But let's just start with, what are the workloads that you got right now, and how do we go and help optimize those before we do anything? Now we can go and execute on a plan.
I'm also just going to add something there, because I think one of the things that you've got to plan for is to give yourself optionality, because if you leave it so late that you don't have optionality, then your ability to negotiate a good deal is going to significantly be diminished. So, from my perspective, you should be talking about it well in advance and understanding where you're going with those things. And equally, I think there's also, more often than not, opportunities even within a contract term to optimize and find cost savings and look at things another way and start to build towards it. It may not be everything, but we also said, right up the start of this, it's not an all or nothing conversation. You're probably still going to have something in the cloud. So it's kind of working out what that optimized position looks like and see what fits in terms of the context of that 3-year deal and certainly the renewal period after.
Yeah, I like that. Very wise, real world advice. Next question, they say, I get the cost argument, but for AI workloads specifically, aren't the hyperscalers still ahead on GPU availability and managed tooling? What do you think, Ronnie?
For some use cases, the answer is yes. But that's not what we see the need for most businesses today. Most businesses aren't out there trying to train models. That's not where people are trying to go. Where businesses are looking at, they're looking at deploying RAG, retrieval augmentation generation. They're looking at co-pilots, documentation search, small inference models. These things are things that don't require that hyperscale infrastructure, and you can run on lower, more cost-effective GPUs that bare metal and that Hivelocity can provide. Ned can speak to it because I know Ned's team spends a lot of time testing and doing this. So Ned, if you want to throw a little bit around some of the work you're doing there around the GPU work, but again, it's one of those kind of things where yes, the answer is yes, certain workloads absolutely, but we've got a spot that fits for what businesses needs today, and we're ready and we're deploying. So.
Well, Ronnie, if you don't mind me interjecting before I throw it over to Ned, Ronnie, remember that company we just spoke with a week or two ago that is benchmarking GPUs for optimization? I mean, they're building a really successful company, and it's all just based on everybody thinks they need the latest and greatest in terms of the GPUs. But what we're finding is, for a lot of different kind of, especially SLM models, you don't need the latest and greatest. It's okay to go and do one or two generations back. And it was really interesting. Ronnie and I were talking to this company, and they've literally built this SaaS product to help organizations purchase the right type of GPU. And what they're seeing on a global basis is most people are buying actually too much horsepower because they want that latest and greatest, and they don't need it. And it was interesting because we've been having all these internal conversations along with Ned, and it was really validating to talk to this other company completely outside of Hivelocity that said, hey, we think we're building something here. And it was right according to the thesis that we have seen going on that, some things you need the latest and greatest, 1,000,000%. But more often than not, it's actually not what you need. So sorry, Ned, I just want to go and I'll let you go into there. But I thought it was really fascinating, Ronnie, because we literally just had that conversation with the company.
That was a great example. I would follow up by saying just it's all about ROI for the clients. Don't treat AI like a buzzword. Treat it like what it is, which is a powerful tool. But, if I need to put together some furniture, I'm not going to go get a pressure washer from, the hardware store or a jackhammer. You want to make sure that you get the tool that matches with what you're trying to accomplish. And a lot of professional services firms, they really just need that quick document retrieval. They need that RAG architecture. They need something that's pointed against their selective model. They don't need a tool that allows them to go on and say, tell me the ingredients I need for the perfect turkey sandwich. They need to be able to put something in that's specific to a use case for their business and get that faster than they can with just a massive document repository or a massive library. They want to be able to get metrics that help to drive them to outcomes. What profile of customer, based on all of the customer data that we have, would lead us to believe they'd be interested in this specific product? Well, here are the customers that have purchased this combination of products in the past, and 80% of customers that purchased that combination of products also followed through and purchased this new one. So maybe if you're rolling out something similar to this new one, you should target these folks with the specials that you're rolling out, the discounts, the announcement of the new product line, things of that nature. That's what gets them to revenue, gets them to adoption, gets them to growth faster by being able to manage those insights. And you still need talented people behind the scenes helping to structure that. We're not looking at AI as something that is just going to replace all the talented humans in the world and do their job for them, because humans are still responsible for driving those outcomes. But you put the right tool in the hands of somebody that's already very talented and very capable and experienced. And now that's where you're getting ROI, and that's where you're getting market acceleration. And we feel like, we're the perfect infrastructure partner and host to help you provide that and achieve.
Well said. Well said. Let's see. Next question, maybe for you here, Ronnie. They're asking, with all the chip shortages we've seen, Doesn't relying on bare metal hardware actually add more risk than just letting AWS or Azure deal with that headache? What's your take?
So supply chain matters, but the hyperscalers are experiencing it too. Like in many cases, they're they're the root cause, right? Because they've gone and acquired a bunch of stuff to try to get ahead of this, which is it's downstream. But this doesn't become a headache for you, the customer, right? This is where Hivelocity comes in, and we provide the bare metal and we manage those supply chains. So there really is no difference from my perspective. But given the supply chain constraints, as Matt was alluding to earlier, that the earlier you can get in front of this thing, the better. Like we want to be your partner. We want to connect with you and actually help plan out your strategy and be connected to you as a partner, not just as a vendor supplier. So I think that's kind of how we get ahead of this. Like I said, everybody's facing the supply chain constraint. It's what we do to take that burden off of our customers that are utilizing bare metal. But again, getting ahead of this and making sure that we're planning the right workload for the right capacity on the infrastructure front, and then planning those things accordingly is where we really shine.
Yeah, you can't be reactive. You can't wait till the last second. Not in this market right now. And David, I'm still surprised, unfortunately, how many people will come to us and say, "Hey, I need this many servers, these GPUs, and I'd love to go and deploy tomorrow." And it's like, no, nobody can go and say yes to that unless you want to pay some crazy premium. But as Ronnie can go and test to, I mean, you just can't go and find them. You've got to have a plan. Like, you can't just wait until the last second, not in today's world whatsoever, because no service provider is going to be able to go and help you in that case. And you're unfortunately going to go and make the wrong decisions for your organization. Especially when you're dealing with supply chain issues, and they are real. But you can get around them by actually developing, a full plan. It's like the same thing, David, like with, people want to go and migrate from the cloud. Hey, how quickly can I go and repatriate? No, we got to go. How long is it going to go and take? Can I do it tomorrow? Can I do it in 2 weeks? If you're going to do this right, you're going to go and come up with a plan. And we've seen, Ronnie, we've worked together on some of these, repatriation models with clients, and some of them take a couple of months. Some of them, with our big one that we're currently working on, Ronnie, that's like a 6-month project, 7-month project, and so forth. But because they put together a plan, we're able to work around the supply chain issues because we have milestones. We're moving one workload at a time, and so forth, and we're working very methodically. The supply chain issues aren't going to go and hold that up. But if that same client came to us and said, "Hey, can I migrate everything next week?" No, you can't. Nobody's going to be able to go and say yes to that.
Yeah, I think that's a great stopping point. I mean, I learned a lot on this event. I know the audience did as well. Hivelocity's here to be your partner. They're here to help you develop a plan, and they've got some really intuitive tools and some wise advice when it comes to comparing, cloud versus bare metal. So thank you so much to Ned, Matt, Ross, and Ronnie for being on the event today. Thank you to the whole Hivelocity team. It's been really educational and informative. And thank you, of course, to our audience for joining us on the event today. Watch your email inbox for more information on this topic. I hope you enjoyed the event and learned a lot. Have a great day.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.